Okay, one of the things about them that I think goes unappreciated is that they are scrupulous obeyers of the law. Even in the case in which they got taken to the Supreme Court, where they demonstrated at a military funeral in Maryland, well, it was not illegal for them to do that at the time. And after that funeral, the state of Maryland passed a law saying, well, protesters have to be a certain number of feet away from any part of the funeral procession, from the church, from the cemetery. And the Westboro Baptist Church had already, didn't know that that was going to happen, but their demonstration would have been legal under that law. They are really smart. They know what they're doing. They research the jurisdictions where they plan to stage their pickets, and they know what the rules are, and they make sure that they're on the correct side of those rules. So they let the police know they're coming. They tell the police, we expect you to protect us. We expect you to contain the mobs that are going to come after us. And that's what the police end up doing, just about everywhere they go. So that is a really good example of extremely unpopular speech being protected under state, federal, local law, as long as it abides by, the speakers must abide by the regulations that are in place. So the thing about protests, you think about the women's marches in the big cities, like in 2017, we had like 500,000 people in the district, a lot of women, but some men too, and a lot of kids. Chicago had a huge march. Los Angeles, Philadelphia, so those things are essentially professionally organized. And the information gets distributed to all the sort of local groups, or you find out on Facebook or through Twitter. But those are the ones you don't really need to worry about so much, because there's a lot of insulation between the people who are participating in the march and the police. So those are the things, you could feel fairly free to, for instance, demonstrate against the war. The war in Iraq had a lot of protests. Well, I rode on a bus with my daughters and a bunch of other people, and we, it was like one of those whirlwind 24-hour trips, and we walked down Pennsylvania and crossed the bridge and walked to the Pentagon. Well, there were people standing on both sides of the street yelling at us and throwing horse manure at us and other kinds of things, which frankly was illegal for them to do. They were assaulting us. But the police kind of just let it happen. And there was really, no reason to complain. We made our point. We got the press we wanted. We got the hell out of there. We came home. I think, frankly, we probably ought to be really proactively thinking about what kinds of protests are going to happen when the Mueller report is issued and things start to happen, because they're going to happen quickly once that report is issued. And the way in which Trump is converting the Justice Department to essentially the private legal counsel and police authority of the president, which is not what the Justice Department is supposed to be at all, is deeply concerning to me and should be to all of us. He said, oh God, what did he say? He said, the rules of the House and the Senate are really bad for this country, which tells you, what he's really thinking. He is we've never had a president who is this allergic to the idea of being bound to obey the law. Even Nixon, who was in fact a trained lawyer, as soon as it got to the point where it was clear he could not survive, he folded his tent and went home. I don't know that Trump's going to do that, and I think we all ought to be prepared for what kind of public action we're going to want to take. So, read the ACLU handout. If you have questions about it, you can certainly go on our website. We have a local ACLU chapter here in Indiana, which is in fact the only local one left. The state chapter in Indianapolis is basically where everybody else has to go. But I'm on the board, Susan Schechter's on the board, and by the way, anybody who wants to join us is more than welcome. But we are a resource for people locally and for groups who are, staging like the march after the Pulse massacre in Orlando. That was amazing. But one of the things about that march that was scary was that the police were not stopping traffic for us. And so cars were crossing through the march, and there were kids in strollers and babies in arms, and it was really dangerous. So if you're going to do a march, first of all, here, doing marches is really difficult. If you want to walk from West Lafayette to Lafayette, 3 years in a row now, we have decided not to do something like that because it involves way too many jurisdictions. We have to deal with campus police, West Lafayette City Police, and Lafayette Police. And it's just too difficult. We're not professional organizers, probably none of you are, but this kind of stuff can be absorbing. There are so many details. So my advice, if you want to organize something in the next several months, is get in touch with us at the ACLU, get in touch with those of us who are helping to organize the women's marches, because we kind of have this down, we know what has to be done. And there are all kinds of logistics to think about, like if you need a sound system or how many people are going to show up. If you make this a public event. Our first march, we thought we were going to get 300 people. We probably had about 1,500. And the police had been notified, and they ended up shutting down that block of Columbia Street that faces the south side of the courthouse because there were just too many people. We could not keep them on the sidewalk, and we could not keep them from coming on to the lawn of the courthouse, which also they don't want, and they didn't want people up on the steps. Well, we had people all over. We couldn't stop it because, number one, we had a really inadequate sound system, so no one could hear us when we were trying to direct them where to go. So, this is one of the most sort of fundamental tools of American political participation, which is to go out, take to the streets. That is raw democracy right there. The thing you want to avoid is the kind of conflict that isn't just verbal. If it transforms into something like, where somebody gets angry and starts throwing punches, then you're in a completely different legal ballgame. So, for instance, think about how hate speech is regulated. I could go out and stand in front of the UU church and scream epithets, But as long as that's the extent of what I'm doing, you can't arrest me. I'm good. I'm totally okay. But if you spray paint hideously racist and anti-gay messages on a bed sheet and you hang it on the fence that belongs to the church, then you're over the line. Unfortunately, we could, the police were not able to identify who did that last year, but they would have been criminally liable for trespass. As you all know, we do not have a hate crimes law in Indiana. We're not likely to get one. Looks like Alting's co-authored bill is going to get bottled up in the Senate. So Chris Campbell's been talking about trying to get something going in the House. Again, they have 33 votes, not 34. We fell one short of breaking the supermajority in the House. So until we fix the gerrymandered districts here, we're going to be unable to get the legal statements that we want out of our legislature. So we're going to use the rules that we already have, many of which favor exactly the kind of public protest we want to do. So it's not necessary to be a lawyer. You just have to be sophisticated consumers of legal information. And it's not hard to do. It seems intimidating, but you don't have to read any court opinions. That's what the ACLU does, and it distills it down for you. So I know we got started late here, but, the free speech zones. I wanted to say something about this. the rules from on high, from the Supreme Court on free speech zones are, as you could imagine, not completely consistent. In fact, far from it. So buffer zones around abortion clinics, not constitutional. Free speech zones, that are located 3 blocks away from a presidential nominating convention, those are apparently legitimate. I don't know if anybody's ever sued to break, to challenge the establishment of those free speech zones. But in my view, that was the first time that was ever tolerated. I thought set a bad precedent. It may have been before 1996, but I definitely remember when Clinton was nominated for his second term. It was in Chicago, and they did not want to repeat of 1968, as if the politics were in any way the same, But they cabined, and it was a Democratic mayor who did this, but they cabined everybody, 3 blocks down from the United Center, and nobody cared what they were saying. When we went to Cincinnati to protest Kroger's decision to let people bring guns into their stores, they had a free speech area for us. Well, that isn't how the First Amendment works. The First Amendment lives in all of us, and we carry it with us wherever we go. And I think the ACLU guidelines make it pretty clear that as long as you are not breaking any other applicable laws, you're not engaging in violence, and you're abiding by time, manner, and place regulations, you are good to go. So, we have this amazing tool, and we should be using it more. Yes, sir.
How do I distinguish a free speech zone from a time, manner, and place regulation?
It is a time, manner, place regulation. It's one of many kinds of time, manner, place. This is a place regulation. So they had us, for the Kroger demonstration with Moms Demand Action, they had us to the east of a building that was east of the building where the corporate board of directors was meeting. So we yelled at them as they left in their cars. That was all we could do. But guess what? We got on TV, and that was what mattered. Getting on TV, getting the word out that there is principled opposition to some of this stuff. That is changing. That's what changes the political culture. I think our women's marches are, and all of the things that we did in 2017 had a really energizing effect. There was all this momentum. Everybody felt energized, kind of not in a good way, but it was forward movement. It was really good energy, and I really hate for us to.
You made it into a movie too.
Yes, I did make it.
After the Cincinnati protest.
So we have a lot of work to do this year. It's a pretty minor election year, mayoral and city council elections, which we can do, in our spare time. But the major issues are going to be fighting on the national front and making our voices heard here. Okay, I've talked for long enough. Questions, more questions. Eileen.
I went to a Moms Demand Action on the pedestrian bridge shortly after Sandy Hook, and there were open carry people. They were not on the bridge with us, but their presence was felt. So that's pretty intimidating. Yes. And what's the law because
the problem is that Indiana's an open carry state.
Right. But a gun is a gun, and it's very, very intimidating. So if you're going to protest guns and there are people a block away who are out there in a show of force, to me that's an intimidation of
it
public.
It's meant to. There's no way you can't feel it.
But they are totally within their legal rights.
They are. But you're totally within your legal rights.
Right.
In the middle of your protest.
But I don't
call the police.
But
that you feel imminently threatened. The police will say, well, they're within their legal rights, and you say, we want protection from these people because their guns may be loaded. In fact, we're pretty sure they are. Otherwise, they would feel, disempowered. So I think, there are times when it's totally appropriate to call in the police to protect you. I mean, if the Westboro Baptists can do it,
Right.
then certainly us on the other side of the spectrum.
We just said
Right.
Yes.
What happened in Linden?
an open carry citizen was just killed by a police officer.
right.
Oh, I heard
Who was
about that.
threatened, who
Right.
felt threatened, even though this man never drew his weapon.
Right.
So while they would tell you that they're within their rights, you have to ask for the same protection they're guaranteed with their badge.
Well, and I have two words for you. Philando Castile,
Right.
the African-American man who was moving, after he told the cop, I have my gun, I'm going to get it out for you. He didn't get to even pull it out of his pocket before the officer shot him dead in front of his fiancée.
Right.
And his fiancée's like very small child.
Right.
Crickets from the NRA after that.
Right.
And I don't know that the NRA has paid any attention to this particular piece of,
In Lincoln,
yeah.
they haven't. They haven't. And I'm really kind of surprised that
surprised
open
too.
carry activists, you know,
Yeah.
because there's no evidence that he was reaching for his weapon. He clearly is not a criminal. But, you know, at the same time, they're at risk of carrying your gun.
I know, and the
Your
police
company,
feel
you're threatened and they're within their rights. And
Right.
their company, they're threatened, they get to shoot you.
they get to shoot. I know, and it's, I think the gun people are partly responsible for this.
Absolutely.
Because they undermine the police departments, the police officers' ability to determine who's committing the crime and who's not, who's suspicious and who's not, who's threatening and who's not. You know, this whole good guy with a gun and a bad guy with a gun, that's completely unhelpful.
Right.
You know, it does not tell the police anything. In Dallas, when the sniper opened fire, there were armed men who fled the gunfire, right? So the good guys with guns were there, and they did nothing. Except what I think was a pretty human reaction, which was to get out. Yeah.
Well, in this case, you had two good guys with a gun.
Yes, you did. But one ended up dead anyway.
One ended up dead.
I know. And the Indiana State Patrol won't use body cameras.
Right.
As a result of this, even they're saying no. But all the city police departments are using body cameras. That's how we know what happened in Lafayette on, when was it, Thursday? Where the one officer shot his partner, and the way it was described was he twisted his gun and it went off. You know,
And shot her in the back.
and shot her in.
There are so many questions about that story.
There are too many questions about
Many.
it. And the fact that they showed us the body cams videos, 3 of them, didn't help at all. I mean, the guy who did the shooting, his body cam video stopped the minute she screamed. So was that where they just decided to stop replaying it, or did he somehow turn it off? Yeah, so, I mean, you have to know the whole context, you have to know what happened after too. And you need to know, where people were in relation to each other. It's hard to tell in that video. So, I mean, people openly carrying present a nightmare for law enforcement. There's no question about that. And law enforcement, I think, are they like completely on the side of not having people open carry?
No. If you ask county sheriffs, police chiefs, they really don't like that idea. They're not in favor.
That's
There
what
are
I
those
meant.
that will be.
You would think they
but-
wouldn't be,
But I
because it
see
makes their
quotes
job so
here.
much harder.
Right, because they cannot openly determine upon approaching what your intentions are.
Yeah, and I think it's going to end in tragedy at some point. Well, at a protest, where where we're trying to basically say, look, these things are dangerous. Somebody's going to shoot one of us, thereby proving our point, but not in the way that we want, right? I mean, I just the very idea of a gun is
I think the
scary to me. But
there's a national police association had talked about in the case of open shooters, don't go out there with your gun because we don't know who the shooter is. And if we show up and see you with a gun, we're going to shoot you.
that was
National Association of
which
Police
shooting
Officers.
was it? Where
Yeah,
what?
Oh, right.
the black guard. Yeah, the security guard, the bouncer up in Chicago, who actually took the gun off the active shooter. When the police came through the door, he was there with the gun in his hand. All they had was a report of an active shooter.
So
So they killed him.
Right.
So, the whole open carry thing is a real big
Yeah,
issue.
yeah, well, that's like 10 other discussions, right? I mean,
Sure.
I know it's solvable, but we're up against this huge ideological edifice where these guys are just, and it's some women, but mostly guys,
Yeah.
are just, they're gonna die on that hill. They
And
intend to.
unfortunately, a lot of the law enforcement are members.
Are members of it.
And have that ideology, and it's so strange to me, like, how can you be simultaneously supporting this and your life is in danger?
Oh, I know. I know.
So I wish we had more support from them, and we're working on it, but,
in one of my commuting arrangements to Chicago, I was house sitting in an apartment, and one night I came home and the door had been kicked in and the house had been robbed. So I called the Chicago cops, and I'm trying to get a hold of the landlord and all of this. And the cop comes, takes all my information. He says, "You live in Indiana. You're so lucky. You can bring a gun into Chicago." And I thought, and I said to him, like, why would I do that? Why on earth would you tell me to do that? You know, it's like, what the actual, I mean, here was a cop telling me to bring a gun into the city of Chicago where handguns are banned. You know, that just made me cry. I mean, I was like, thanks a lot, take the report, go. You're not really helping much. But that illustrates the problem of the cops that are pro-gun, and it's scary. You think that,
I think the Russia situation with the NRA is going to really discredit the NRA.
it is, I think so too.
And it has
I think that's why we're not hearing from them so
Right,
much.
but you have to know there are organizations besides the NRA that are nowhere near the NRA's profile, but where the true believers are now flocking to.
Okay.
I forget the name of it, but I found it on Twitter.
I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, no, they're not as big, they're not as politically connected, but they are partaking of the NRA's ideology and essentially saying to all these gun owners, when the NRA starts making these political deals that we're not going to agree with, you'll have a place to come. And then, it's something to keep an eye on.
In a manner of speaking, when you see them factionalized like that, it is to our benefit when all those groups get smaller and they have no central voice. They kind of lose that political clout.
Well, it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
I think the NRA is going to be collateral damage
Right.
when the Mueller report comes out, and there are going to be criminal indictments, there are going to be obstruction of justice charges, there are going to be campaign finance violations. I mean, this is all about the money, and the NRA was basically laundering Russian money in violation of federal law. And, we're going to see some people go to jail, and, we're going to be kind of happy about it. Yeah, no, I mean, but there will be backlash. I mean, especially in this state. I mean, we couldn't get Toby Beck elected. I don't know if we could have gotten you elected.
My guess is no.
We couldn't get Sherry Shipley elected in our state senate district. It's so discouraging to me that we cannot get Democrats to the polls to counteract the strength of the rural conservatives. It's still entrenched, that divide.
How does redistricting reform happen in the gerrymander state?
After the 2020 census, which is itself mired in politics
And jeopardized because they can't woman or staff it.
they can't staff it, they aren't able to lead test these questions.
And the government shut down, so none of the training's
None of it's happening.
it may not happen.
Yeah, so, except that it's constitutional mandate,
Right.
so they will do some semblance of a census. And on the basis,
Doing it online, on a voluntary basis.
they may.
I think I heard they were talking about putting out a voluntary survey.
I will ask my first cousin John Ebout is a retired economist from Cornell who was hired by Obama to be the chief economic scientist for the census. And he thinks it's gonna go forward, he thinks they're gonna get rid of the citizenship question. He's pretty sure we're gonna have a normal census. But I and all my historian social scientist friends are kind of really white knuckling our way through the next year and a half because we don't know if they're going to collect the information that has always been collected,
So for me,
which is what we need for the census to be historically valuable.
the driving concern going into 20 is the fallout that you're speaking of in terms of the Mueller report.
Right,
And candidates being out there in public
right.
are now going to be, I think, at greater risk than we were in 18.
We're going to have to be careful. We may need to invest in security, but let me actually answer Bill's question. The way the process works, or has worked in the past, is after the census has been reported, just the sort of basic population counts for each state, they compare to the last decennial census, so they'll compare our numbers to 2010, and Indiana's losing population. Question is, will we lose enough in these 10 years to lose another congressional seat? So once we know where the congressional seats are going to get put, we get 435 nationwide, and more of them are leaving the Midwest and the Northeast and going to Florida, Texas, Nevada, California. So once they know how many districts they get to draw, then guess what happens? The RNC, because it controls the majority. It controlled the majority in 2010, so it drew the maps for Indiana because that's what the legislators who controlled the State House were totally happy with, right? Sure, go ahead and draw our maps. So they drew maps that actually look more contiguous, they have fewer of these weird, little fingers of gerrymandering. I have a whole presentation on this gerrymandering stuff, which I'm happy to do. Some of these maps are really, truly outrageous. Just look at North Carolina, for instance, where the redistricted map got struck down by the federal courts, but Pennsylvania's got upheld, and that's why there are more Democrats in the state legislature in Pennsylvania this year. So
They get to redraw the line.
they get to redraw the map. So in states like Nebraska, where they have an independent, nonpartisan redistricting commission, that's the agency that gets to draw the maps, no matter who controls the legislature. We don't have that. We've been asking for it, and we've gotten laughed out of the State House.
Sue Scholler said that was her first piece of legislation back in 1990. That was
Well,
the first bill
God
she
bless her.
introduced.
Yes, good for
It's
her.
been, so 1990, this is a Republican, it went nowhere.
So we run the risk of losing a congressional seat here in Indiana.
At least,
And
not more.
as I understand it, is it the NAACP? I know Arlen Carson's group is suing, and they plan to take it to the Supreme Court to bar gerrymandering based on racial bias. So,
Well, I hope they do that. I hope Eric Holder's initiative continues to go forward because that is one of the most obvious ways in which the power of democratic voting gets diluted. Because they will cut, if you look at Gary, for instance,
Right.
how the State House districts were drawn to divide them up, so that those districts would be,
my concern
less
is,
less
yes.
certain to return Democrats.
If you take Pete's seat up there, Visclosky's, do they combine them with the fourth?
See, now,
They can,
I don't know, they could combine them with the second,
right,
which has been reliably Republican.
Correct.
Since Joe Donnelly gave it up.
correct.
So those are the political decisions that get made behind